So it is my pleasure to kick off with our first panel of the day. This is sort of a tradition with CyberNext DC as we bring together the some technology luminaries that have strong, let's say, strong opinions on policy, on cyber policy. And I'm going to hand things off to the moderator of the panel, Jen Ellis, who's a board member of the Center for Cybersecurity Policy and Law. One of the things that we've been doing recently with this panel is doing it virtually so that we can get people around the world involved. And Jen Ellis joins us from Silicon Fen, also known as Cambridge, England. Off to you, Jen.
Lovely. I appreciate that. I'm not sure that I've heard Silicon Fen before. It conjures some interesting mental images. Yeah, thank you for including me. It is an honor to be participating, particularly in this panel, the Cyber Luminaries panel. This is an annual panel for those that are new to CyberNext, and in many ways, I've always thought of it as sort of helping to set the scene for the other sessions that come throughout the event. We are joined obviously by our luminaries, and they're going to sort of share their experience, their points of view, perceptions on what's going on in security. And then I think there'll be like a number of sessions throughout the event that will kind of pick up some of those threads and drill down into them more. So with that note, I will introduce our luminous luminaries. I'm going to keep it really, really brief. There is more information on each of them. Obviously, they all have amazing backgrounds. So there's more information on each of them if you look at the scheduler, and I would encourage you to do exactly that. But for now, I will keep it brief. Jay Ballou is the COO and CISO at a stealth startup. There's nothing like a little bit of mystique. Sam Curry is the SVP and CISO at Zscaler, or as we say here, Zscaler, which sounds much less sexy. And Josh Corman is the executive in residence for the Institute for Security and Technology's Undisruptible 27, which Megan just mentioned in her fantastic talk. Hi guys, thanks for joining me.
Hey,
Jen.
I want to kick us off. Like, this is an annual panel, obviously. And so the most natural question for me to ask you is what's changed in the past year? What should people know? What's different? Or is it, is it all the same? Nothing ever changes in security, right? We keep this panel, by the way, for people listening, super informal.
Yeah.
So I am not going to invite people to speak. I'm just going to tell them to go for it.
Jay, you spoke just before me. You get to go first.
I did, but we're going to do this collision a lot, I think. But so just to kind of kick off, I think, if it's not sprinkled with a fairy dust layer of AI, I don't know what else has changed. Like, right, we're doing everything with AI. And I think initially what you're seeing is CISOs trying to play catch up. In terms of normal protections they would have with like third-party risk management, trying to figure out, okay, you want this thing that we always had before, but now it does the thing with AI, or trying to crawl back some of the protections of things that they didn't know was ingesting their data or training with their data. And only now they're playing a lot of catch up with that. I think, there's like, for security people, we look at the world predominantly through threats, and I think everyone else looks at predominantly through opportunity. But I believe that in this area, we can see both. So there's a threat, but there's also really, really clear and significant opportunities. So if you look at what Expo did or the DARPA AICC, there's tons of opportunity for security folks with AI as well. And I think that's a really big shift to last year. I don't think we saw the world that way. Sam?
Yeah, the AI fairy dust had to come out, and it is both the most underhyped and overhyped thing at the same time. But it is developing at a phenomenal rate. Like, that's undeniable. And the other thing I'd say is a couple of things. One is the geopolitical situation and the United States domestic political situation has changed enormously. We can't deny it. I mean, it's just there. It's the elephant in the room. Which changes everything from the funding context to the motivation to the what's available in terms of resources and how we work together and everything else. And I think everyone in the room probably feels that enormously. But the other thing is, for me, this last summer, the API security issue, which Jay, you kind of mentioned with third-party security and supply chain, was driven home, and it was kind of mentioned just before the sales lock drift incident. The degree to which APIs are intertwined, but there's no mutual TLS, for instance, that there's the authorization seems to have been forgotten on this web of interconnection among organizations, and it seems to be getting heavier and heavier. And then understanding how it's being mined by the opponent in near real time. And for instance, I'll be very specific. The actors, because there were two predominant actors, one main one that was involved, but there was a secondary one as well. We used Trufflehog to go mining through the things that they take. And if you ran that on what went from various organizations, it didn't seem like much. But when you deployed AI, some of the nuances in that data for things like social engineering, some of the inference in things like support tickets for what could be weaknesses and vulnerabilities, fueled an engine, and then you saw directly the exploits appearing for what might exist as 0 days or even negative day type exposures. So the degree to which we are, I'm going to steal from Josh here, the to which we're dependent on things, I'm paraphrasing, I'm not going to steal your thunder totally, is ridiculous, and the degree to which APIs are interconnecting everything for vital services, or at least semi-vital services among organizations, adds up to a lot. And I used to say there's no such thing as a medium vulnerability, that they don't exist, right? They're either low or they're critical. And what we found is that they were chaining mediums to get to something significant very, very, very quickly. So those are big takeaways for me.
I think the macro change isn't so much the specific subjects you see at conferences or in headlines or attacks. It's that we have disparate rates of change, right? The velocity and volume of which we're introducing new hard problems exceeds our velocity and volume of triaging and getting them safe enough for integration. So just as we get a new paradigm and we get our arms around it and we hand wring in the public-private partnerships and we have the early adopters get some best practices that maybe we can do as a voluntary, and then we have some law or notice of proposed initial rulemaking and back and forth, that uncompressible mean time from a new introduction of a problem to us actually getting our arms around it is just too long for the concurrent number of topics that we have. So what we have to do, and that's why I appreciated Megan's keynote, is we have to look at the kind of muscles and collaborations that have worked, figure out how to do more of them in parallel and faster. And I think for a long time, I've been in this room many times, either on the Jumbotron or in the room. One of our questions is, how can we do, an early baby step, or how can we buy ourselves some time, or how do we, get more data first? And we've kind of been that slowing down, somber, reflective, let's do this, measure twice, cut once. There are times I'm watching this very room now dread that uncompressible minimum response time and say, how do we get more agility? How do we get more parallel action? How do we get more adaptability? So to me, that's the issue. There's too many net new topics. We haven't closed out the old ones like our ransomware. And yet now on the horizon, if we have problems with AppSec when humans are writing code, to quote the great philosopher, Biggie Smalls, more code, more problems. And with more AI writing code, we're not really compressing the defect rate. So we're going to have a lot more net new attack surface unless and until we can bend that arc. We also have not just economic security disruption like the ransomware task force, but we have typhoons targeting non-combatant civilian infrastructure like water and power. And these are the target-rich cyber poor, or to quote our usual panelist, people living below the security poverty line. They don't have security best practices. They don't know what IT security is, let alone OT security. And we've got about a year and a half before be ready as early as 2027 that Xi Jinping has asked his army to be for the reunification with Taiwan. So we're going to cover a lot of these things. I'll shut up now. But I would say we've got to get parallel action on national security, economic security, and public health and safety. And we have to be able to tackle the shiny enterprise topics, but also the ones that could affect public support for government intervention and public safety.
So I'd like to riff off that actually just for a second.
Go for it.
Yeah, so most of the time security is advanced through incremental changes on a baseline. I mean, we often say, perfection is the enemy of the good. But the truth is that it's the tuning that improves things. It is asinine for us to think that we can just continue to incrementally improve off a baseline that's 20, 30 years old. Because we've had discontinuous step changes in capability in the attackers and in even the landscape that we're working with. And most of our innovation, I'm a practitioner for vendors, for a cyber vendor, right? but most of the innovation comes from the vendor community, right? Most people don't even know what a yellow team is, right? We have blue teams and we have red teams, but a yellow team is the group that builds tools explicitly for red teamers and blue teamers, for the actual people, the men and women on the front line here. And we don't have enough engineering focused on innovation and a step change that is directly focused on the practitioners. There just isn't. And so we're not changing the topography. We're still relying on the same reference architecture and base model as before. And look, the term zero trust has been abused to death over I don't know how long. But that was the last phrase I heard where someone talked about an architectural design principle. Forget when people sell zero trust, myself included, by the way. But like that was the last time we had an architectural design principle for simplification or transformation of an infrastructure. And it isn't going to happen just by saying, well, let's dust off the CISSP manual from 25 years ago, and let's just go deploy more firewalls and more VPNs. That's not the answer. So somehow we have to change the game and the nature of the game to choose the terrain, or we're going to be sitting here going, wow, how did that happen? We were incrementally improving for the last 25 years and we died. It's not good enough. So I just want to throw that out there. I know we get a bit controversial, but I see Josh nodding and shaking his head both, which is usually a good sign.
Well, could I add something?
Yeah,
I
go
feel
ahead,
like
Jaya.
there's a little bit of like I mean, I think we have two things. I think we're dealing with all of this like legacy tech debt that we've just incurred over all these years. But at the same time, I don't know if you guys have this, but what's that movie where there's that comet headed to Earth and then you got to get into a rocket and blow that thing? Anyway, I feel like
Armageddon.
I was gonna say, is that Armageddon you're talking about?
Thank you. Aptly titled film. But I sometimes feel like it feels like we're careening towards this fate, this eventuality that's fueled by the geopolitical elephant in the room. And I feel like some of these, it's death by a thousand cuts when it comes to our ability to defend critical infrastructure, national security, and subsequently all of the intellectual property that fuels all of that. So I feel like we have this like kind of, I'm saying this wrong, but like a sort of shaky precipice of all of our current infrastructure and stuff. And at the same time, there's this existential threat looming ahead that we're a little bit blind to.
Wow.
Yeah.
So welcome to the Depression Hour.
No, it's not meant to be
Thanks so much for
depressive.
joining
The
us.
Google's about it.
Okay, so it sounds like you guys are all pretty agreed that things are not looking up right now, and that we got a lot of problems that we're facing, and that we need to make some serious changes. What changes? Like, what do we do? For people who are listening to this, who are like hearing you and going, yes, that all sounds really bad. Security people were really good at pointing out problems, when less good sometimes at suggesting solutions.
Well, Jen, just to kind of, it was a happy ending. That movie had a happy ending. I just want to point out that sometimes the mobilization of that existential threat makes us remember what's actually really important and that shit needs to get done in order to kind of combat that. So it could, like, I think we have a
I
depressing.
like that. I like that message. That's good. And so we're galvanized. What are we galvanized to do?
So Jenna, I'm going to emphasize freeing up resources for, and this sounds really hard to do, but there's a lot of actual models for this in the military. There's a lot of models for this in strategy in general. You free up resources to make bets. You take where you don't think you can. You take resources off the table and you align better with the source of where your funding comes from, for instance. So you talk to your CFO, you talk to your board, and you say, yeah, okay, so you didn't give me more money. I'm going to self-fund and I'm going to accept a bit more risk in order to make some bets. And you talk, and
this is you're saying CISO should do.
Well, so yeah, I mean, this is a business. If you're a practitioner like me, what you've got to do is say, I'm going to take let's take 100 points that I'm spending, and right now I'm at redlining at 100 points spent on the projects that I've been pushing for years. I'm going to back off and take 15 of those points, painful as it is, and accept a bit more risk in order to place some bets, talk to more stealth companies, talk to more startups, actually maybe invest in an internal organization. Because if you don't build some reserve capacity, if you don't build some ability to have a discontinuous change, it's exactly what happens on product teams. If you're not building the next capability, if you're not actually thinking in terms of, what is the disruptor, right? The blockbuster model, how they were disrupted by Netflix. If you're not doing it, someone else is. And the same is true in cyber. And so you have to build that into your plan to some degree. And it's not just hope there. There's actually there's a Harvard Business Review article, and I'm happy to share it with anyone, on how to manage a portfolio for risk investment. You have to have some table stakes bets. You have to have some call it competitive bets, and you have to have some game changer bets. If you're not doing that as a practitioner and thinking about it like almost an engineering challenge, then you're not doing it right. But when you do, it's actually quite hopeful, because there's some amazing innovation happening. Our industry has more startups than any other industry for longer than anyone else, because bright ideas are happening. Now, a lot of them are garbage, but a lot of them are great. And so they got to have a chance too. And if we don't free those resources up, those ideas will die as well. So yes, it's hard, but if you do this right, you'll actually provide funding for the really good things out there.
I can see Josh
Josh's challenge.
come in and challenge you.
That's a very Marie Antoinette answer. Seb would love to Sam. Let them eat, if there's no bread, let them eat cake.
By the way, they did have warehouses full of cake.
So back to that, we have a tale of two markets, a tale of two cities, or pick your favorite thing. Who's in the crosshairs right now? It's not people with a board and shareholder value and board level prioritization. It's water facilities. Can and would be disrupted. Last summer, the second most damaging cyber attack in history wasn't a cyber attack. It was a glitch in CrowdStrike. We had major disruptions to airlines, to hospitals, to other businesses dealing with that over-dependence on undependable IT, from accidents like CrowdStrike or adversaries who wanted money. We now have the PLA, an army unit targeting civilian infrastructure, as I said before. So I think the bridge maybe between the enterprise mind that we use and the mind that we have to start to foster, because these enterprises can't meet their bottom line and hit their quarterly targets if their employees have no food and water, or hospitals. So no water is no hospital in 2 to 4 hours. And we have a very clear, overt, stated, declassified threat to water resilience. If you can do an overpressurization event to a burst water main, you have no hospital. And if you want to ride to the next nearest one, they're using the same kind of water equipment as the town that had the first burst pipe. But in this, maybe the middle ground here is, I think the term is ruthless prioritization, where we haven't really done the hard work of, when everything is critical, nothing's critical. So out of the 16 sectors, what's the most critical sectors? It depends on who you ask. Out of the 55 national critical functions, which I find to be a more tractable boundary of risk, there's about a dozen of them. If you shut them off, people die. And those people work at your company. Those manufacturing plants need water and power. Those data centers need cooling from water, and they need massive amounts of power, especially if they're the AI data centers. So I don't think we really realized that, much like the Romans, sacking Rome did not take marching soldiers into the city. It took sacking the aqueducts on the periphery, the weak Achilles heel that undergird and underpin both your employees and your business operations. So to me, it's I want some of the talent and expertise and public policy, public-private partnerships, not merely to focus on where we have been, which is the Fortune 5000, but also on the public safety, human life, and basic human needs that undergird everything we do. Now, that ruthless prioritization, I mean ruthless, because there's 151,000 water facilities across the US. 85% are target-rich, cyber poor. There's only about 650 of them in the ISAC. We have a 0.4% participation. So you could say, let's just focus on the population densities, but then you might not get insulin production. So I think one of the things I'm trying to do through the Undisruptible Project is say, out of those 151,000, 6,000 of them support the nation's hospitals. Another couple thousand support pretty strategic data centers. So can we have a sufficient dose of ruthless prioritization to make more resilient the zip codes that are too sensitive to fail? And I think the necessity is the motherhood of invention. And if we focus on these areas where we are over dependent on undependable things, I think we may come up with strategies that also happen to help enterprise. It's not usually adding cyber, it's removing complexity. It's not usually putting in a new bad edge device that might compromise us. It might be getting rid of an unsupported end of life device that you probably should have gotten rid of 15 years ago. So I think we do the top down method. I think we should take a good hard look at the bottom up. What are the actual things that reduce risk?
I think you have to do both, Josh. It's inescapable. I mean, if we don't do the triage on the immediate things that are life and death and figure out which one of the 16 actually matter and then get granular and get prescriptive, horrible things happen. And if we don't do the top down, then the relief never comes. And if people don't participate in their own rescue and just wait for it, it's never going to happen.
So on that note, and recognizing that probably listening to this are people who are in potentially both roles, practitioners, policymakers, other roles as well. And so giving advice on how everyone can play a role is great. But if everything's a priority, nothing's a priority, right? And I think, Josh, you were just speaking to this in your view, just even focused purely on the water sector, like if all, what was the number you gave of how many there are? 120?
151,000.
151,000, right. So if we think of all 151,000 as a priority, then we're not going to get anywhere. Whereas if you can narrow it down. So, you know, you guys in your beginning bit of what's changed, you went through a really broad range of topics. Now I'm going to ask you, like, really, for people listening, which are the priorities they should be focused on? And I'm pretty sure that's going to be different whether you're talking to a policymaker versus a practitioner. So I'll ask Sam what, from a practitioner point of view, you think the priorities are to focus on. And then we'll move on. Jay, I'll come to you next. And then Josh, I'll come to you at the end, if that's okay.
Yeah, so I'll answer it. I'll answer it generically, and I know no doubt people will want specifics, so I'm happy to do that as well. But I think, look, it is a risk management game. So buzzwords aside, I care about making sure that I actually have as much specificity and least access in my environment as I can. I also care about least function in my environment. I care about least exposure in my environment. So I want to get the smallest topography. And I want to support complexity for the business while having the most manageable surface area I can. At the moment, we talked about AI earlier. I'm trying to find ways to use AI that don't create blind spots, in the sense that, like, we can have overlearning with AI in the sense that the silicon can give us what we know we like to be fed, and we can just hungrily eat what it gives us and then become predictable. And then the one thing we don't want to do is be predictable to an opponent. So how do we use AI to increase efficiency and effectiveness? Both, as opposed to just use it to look better with our metrics that we report on blindly every month. So what I care about is effectiveness is measured. And the thing about security is we're often measuring a negative. We have an intelligent opponent and we're measuring a negative. So I have to look at ways of increasing those two things, which leads to a reduction in risk, which means less probability of something happening and less bang when it happens. So I've got to change the topography of my environment. Now, I said that in kind of general terms, but specifically, I know how I do that for my cloud, which I have 60 million users behind. I know how I do that for my corporate environment, but this is going to be really different for different practitioners who may be on the public sector or maybe on the private sector, or faced with if they're running a university, or if they're smaller, as Josh alluded with what Wendy always says about below the poverty line. What do you do there? And that poverty line, by the way, is going up.
Yeah.
You know, we talk about shifting demographics in the population in general, and what are the 1% almost. It's worse in cyber in some ways. You have to have a far bigger department in an age where you should have to have less, given what AI can bring to the table. So I don't want to hear more about co-pilots, and no offense to anybody. I don't want to hear more about just the standard application of AI. I want to hear how you're actually going to make practice of cybersecurity better. So that's what I'm looking at on my side. I don't know if that answered it for you, though.
Other AI assistants are available. Just you know.
Yeah, but there were many. By the way, there were many. But I don't want someone to turn up and say, "Don't worry, my big bit bucket with a brain is going to just take care of cyber for you," because it's not true. It's not. And I'm very interested in how widgets are going to help me with slight improvements to efficiency and effectiveness that don't replace the human but up levels the game. So I want to keep the same number of people and improve their lives and jobs. And I also want to keep the ramp into my department available for Mark I human beings getting into the space.
So you and Jay both have commented on the fact that AI is both a threat and an opportunity. And
it's in several ways it's a threat, yeah. And I just mentioned another one, right?
Right. And you've said you don't want to see AI being tasked with just solving the problem because it's not going to work. But is security behind on AI? Are we
Well, I
we
think security is
behind?
very good at giving us, I think there's a lot of good security solutions that potentially can help you manage AI and govern AI and do things with it. There are AI proxies, for instance, and lots of really good things. They're not ubiquitous by any means. But as for using it ourselves, I'm rather disappointed at the industry. I mean, I know how I use it in my environment, but I don't see the average practitioner using it in a way that it provides a force multiplier or game changer. It's still incremental improvements, as I mentioned earlier. It isn't that discontinuous step function in effectiveness or inefficiency in a way that I think is reliable yet.
Jay,
And
over to
I
you.
would love it if you guys disagreed.
Well, I think it depends. So, but let me back up for a second, because you started the first part with, like what do we see happening with AI and what are the prioritizations, et cetera, the generic prioritization. So I want to be super clear. Screw all of the stuff that we used to do. Let's just look at what the attackers are successful with. Okay. If you are on an information security kind of poverty budget, then let's like be the most effective and use the Pareto principle. What 20% of effort is going to get you 80% of the result? There might be some things. And if you looked at the report, like there was a report that we wrote from Rapid7 in 2023, which talked about, what are the initial access vectors, how hackers always get into networks, what are they doing that's so successful? So the first and foremost thing is still we suck at identity. We stuck at good identity and access mechanisms and good authorization models to do this effectively. So they're still reusing credentials. There's still no proper MFA. We still have misconfigured it. And now with all of the APIs and all the tokens, it's just a question of like misapplication of the OAuth credential. So like we've broken identity, and that was in 2023. We figured out, identity is the biggest thing that we should do. And the second biggest reason that hackers still manage to get into networks is because of not fixing the vulnerabilities we have. So really, those were like almost 80% of the reasons that hackers were getting in. And then the Verizon DBIR in 2025 says exactly the same thing. The biggest two reasons, like almost 80% of the reason that attackers are still successful is because of identities that we've not managed properly without MFA, and the same thing for vulnerability. So if we would actually have to have a budgetary choice, that would be the choice. That would be the thing. Let's just start there, do that thing, and then everything else is like better and better, and we're shaving the problem to get really good. So I want to say that. And that was my really quick answer to the first question. And the second part of that question, which is like, how are we doing? I think AI now, the advantage is for attackers, not for defenders. Although the dual-edged sword can be both, it is very well being like utilized, I think, from an attacker's perspective rather than from a defender's perspective. And some of that is the arguments that Sam made about, what is it that we should be having available to folks protecting their stuff? Like, what should AI be able to do for the security defenders? That's part of the issue. But like, if you look at it, take a look at things like CVE Genie, right? Like we're reducing the time to exploit massively. We're talking about for less than a cup of coffee in 15 minutes, you've got an exploit. And it's not about 2 weeks or 3 days or 5 days to get to your known exploitation rate. So if you have an attacker and they can pretty much YOLO with like tools that are available on GitHub and just build the thing and not have an incredibly advanced, they don't have to write it themselves. So this worry for me is like really significant. Right now, we had an advantage and we lost that advantage, and attackers definitely have it for AI.
So there weren't super high barriers to entry into cybercrime as a market in the first place. And now they're getting even lower or less relevant. How much of a factor is that? Or are we already at a point where
I am Jen, like the ability for ransomware groups, which initially were just well funded to buy 0 days, they don't need to be so well funded anymore. That this is for me really, really quite terrifying. There's now like an open source variant. Today I was reading like of the Expo product that is out there that allows you to pen test stuff. I think it's good. I think we should embrace the dual use nature of all things that allow us to test security. So I want to be very clear. I do not want to see a Visionaries thingy for this, but I'm super crystal clear on this. However, I think that we need to understand that for defenders to embrace these things and utilize this capacity well, we are just a little bit slower to the game because we are doing our homework, because we are cautious, because we want to understand and not risk anything. I actually think we are losing the game for this very reason.
Oh boy, I had some good points to make, and then Sam and Jaya made other ones. So to touch on both of them, then pivot to the original question, I guess. I agree with Sam on we're not being very creative on defender uses or defender innovations. I think some of the more creative folks are like Sunil Yu, who are looking at, home field advantage and dynamic polymorphic environments that can reduce the entropy or the attack surface or the exposure. So there's a handful of people. To that last point about lowering the barriers to entry, we are getting our butts whooped by teenagers, gangs of teenager folks. I'm so tired of us saying sophisticated adversaries. Salt was hella sophisticated. Salt was incredibly impressive. And some of these attack chains are incredibly impressive. And we're getting spanked by teenagers.
That's Salt Typhoon for those who are listening.
Yeah, Salt Typhoon, sorry. But David Etchu and I did a talk many, many years ago at RSA, turned into a trilogy. But the idea was everything starts with an adversary. So we said, let's map a who to a why to a what to a how. It starts with a predator who has an appetite. They go after prey within that appetite. They have a dynamic range of capabilities to pounce on that prey. And when they're full, they move on. And we were arguing at the time that we were always prone, we were always prey, we just lack sufficient predator interest. Well, that game is over, folks. And which predator is after you matters. So trying to have the overwhelming majority of these target-rich cyber poor asset owners and operators be playing with AI and defense and doing a bad job at it, I think is a weapon of mass distraction. I think there's a small group of us that should be doing Office of the CTO, Mad Chemist, Incubator, Accelerator, and coming up with new and novel ways to harness this disruptive technology for everybody. But if you're an owner operator and you know that TP-Link routers are part of initial access campaigns, if you know that known exploited vulnerabilities in security products, we buy security products to keep bad guys out, and they're the things that let you in. If we know the general attack chains getting into water or power, shouldn't we then focus on who's using those known vulnerable entry points associated with this campaign from this army unit and others? So not everyone is facing every predator. And I think we got to get much less hand wavy and say, for my too big to fail, too consequential to fail, worst case scenario, who's after us? How are they doing it? And what can we do to stop it? I love we want to get to solutions, right? What I love about Idaho National Labs cyber informed engineering, and I lovingly call it consequence informed engineering, is in a cyber physical environment, and this could apply to a Fortune 100 as well. You kind of look at what's the worst that could happen. What can we do about it? And if you want to reduce the likelihood, you add a lot of cyber and cost. But if you want to reduce the consequences, you often add engineering or remove dependency and complexity. And what we're doing when we look at these target-rich cyber poor is we're saying, let's not add a firewall or add more software stack. For the highest consequence failure of a compromised water facility, can we add a $2,000 to $4,000 engineering solution such that they will throw the punch, but we can take the punch? And what we have is a disruption of service, but not a disruption of healthcare. And I think we should be taking a page from engineering, like true engineering, not hand-wavy software engineering and software architects, and look, where are we over-dependent on undependable things? What choices can we make to right-size that dependence so we are only as dependent as dependable? And then we should look at the highest consequence failures and marshal our resources there. So to me, the advice I would give a water facility is wildly different than the advice I would give in a Fortune 1000. And if we can't stop teenagers, we should not assume our water facilities can stop a military unit. So we know who's coming, when they're coming, how they're acting, and we can take more surgical, prescriptive steps to harden those. I know I hope and think we're going to get to offense versus defense, but let me remind you, our ability to throw a punch is entangled with our ability to take a punch or a counter punch. And right now we have a glass jaw. And if we take a punch, we're going to be knocked on our butts.
Okay, so you gave me a lot of, and by the way, I'm stealing weapons of mass distraction. That is beautiful. But you gave a lot of different points to pull on there. But you did just serve up offense versus defense. And, Sam, at the beginning, when he talked about what change, has talked about, the change of administration. Megan talked about the current government's focus and shift. So there has been a lot of reporting on this. A lot of people have said that the current US administration is more interested in offensive capability in cybersecurity than being focused on defensive capability. To what extent is that hype, and how much is it true? And how much does that matter to your average organization? Is that a thing that we need to be trying to correct in some way, or is it something we should be embracing? And I'm gonna let you guys decide for yourselves.
So
Brave enough
Jen,
to
I,
jump
I
in.
can't I can't speak to the degree to which it's true or not, but I can say that offensive cyber capability has to do with optionality and policy. It has to do, it's a very political thing. It has to do with the ability to have options available, especially for, it's dime stuff, right? Diplomacy, information warfare, military, and economic tools of state. And so it makes sense to develop that capacity. Defense is different. Defense is about ensuring that you fulfill a basic promise as part of a government for your people and for your constituents. And so it's fundamentally a political decision which way you lean. It doesn't, but Josh said it really well, and I'm not going to try to rephrase it, but you can't just throw punches, right? And that the two are inextricably linked. There are consequences when you have an ability to punch and not take a punch. We have to build resilience as a foundation for our digital infrastructure as a nation. And I think to some degree, if you just don't care, then that's different. But I don't think we have that luxury, especially not in a pluralist democracy. So what we have to do is think about, well, what do we care about, and really invest in that. Because if we don't, then first of all, it's threatened anyway. But secondly, we're going to lose the ability to function in many ways, and it affects core capabilities of us and our ability to have a society, let alone wage war.
So
That's my general commentary. Go ahead, Jay.
Yeah, sorry, I wanted to add, like, it really depends on where you house this offensive capability, because there are traditional places where they've always been held with intelligence units and very specific units that are there in order to support military operations. And as some of you may know, I live in the Netherlands, and I used to be part of the Dutch critical infrastructure. I used to be the CISO of the national telecom operator for 7 years. And one of the things that happened is that they wanted to expand those powers of offensive tradecraft beyond the intelligence agencies to just law enforcement. Everyone could hack offensively, and then not just, but globally, and for all kinds of different cases. And I was against that, just because there is tradecraft in this. So it is complemented with other forms of intelligence. It isn't just, I see an attack on something that's an economic target, and then therefore I hack back. I found that it was just a much too, a simple argument to say, if they hack us, we hack back. I am still vehemently against it. However, I lost the battle in the Netherlands. It is absolutely now part and parcel of the capacity of law enforcement to hack back. So I hope we don't lose it everywhere, especially when we can't take the punches that are headed towards us, as Josh said.
When I was first researching Anonymous, this is even before we started the cavalry. The cavalry's 12 years old tonight, by the way, folks. But even before that, the first time I went to one of the big forts to present on hacktivism and what we expected, I got a really weird question, but the question was, what does the hacker community think of our capabilities? And my answer was something almost verbatim to this, which is that I assume we're incredible at offense. I assume we're terrible at defense. I assume we take solace in the assumption the same is true for our enemies, but as a more connected and democratic nation, we stand much, much more to lose. And that got me back to have a much bigger meeting, which was, origins of cavalry, et cetera. But I think the same is true now. Like, there's, to the question you asked, Jen, is this real? Is this just hyperbole? No, there's definitely an appetite for much more muscular projection of force and offense. Absolutely. NSC and elsewhere. It's definitely happening. The part that scares me more than us using our incredible talent pool for offense is, to Sam's point, we can't take a punch. We're not resilient. I think our resilience and our ability to take punches is what gives us the ability to throw our own punches, right? They're entangled. And more importantly, the part that scares me the most, when I was at the Atlantic Council, we ran a Cyber 912 student challenge with a fake law called the Cyber Mark and Reprisals Act of 2018. And it allowed for privateering and cyber hackback from citizens. And
You're responsible. I see.
well, no, we ran the scenario and every single team caused World War III. Like, even though they could see it coming, they couldn't reverse it. So all the muscle memory for hackback. So the conclusion of that was hackback is whack-yo. And now it's here again. And then that's the part that scares me more. I do think coordinated operations for our incredibly talented, some of the best in the world, is important. And we can't overfixate on that. And we can't allow for operational collisions with the private sector.
Okay, great topic, and I think we could easily spend an hour talking about just hackback. So I will move us on. But Jay, I love the fact that you brought up what's happening in Europe, particularly in the Netherlands. And our conversation thus far has been very US centric. But Europe has been pretty busy, right? We've had the CRA get passed. There's been all sorts of other pieces of cyber legislation over the last few years, NIS2, DORA. They've got the AI Act. They're now reviewing the EU Cybersecurity Act and looking at where to start, where to build on implementation on that. One, I guess my question for you is like, how much does all of this matter to people outside of Europe? And like, what are the real implications of these things? Will they have knock-on benefits? And two, how much should governments generally be working together? Like, is this a thing? Because, Europe's not alone in doing some of this, and there are other nations that are following. And I think earlier we heard Ari reference sort of regulatory harmonization and a desire for that. To what extent, as we look at the problems around cybercrime and the potential for cyber warfare, it is a very interconnected mess. To what extent do governments need to look at it as a whole and work together? And how realistic is that?
So that's a very big question.
Yes, many questions, in fact, that I just fired at you. Sorry.
So just to kind of separate a little bit, right? So the way that the legislators look at the different things in Europe is really trying to create laws per subgroup. And the perfect example is DORA, is specifically for banks and the banking industry. The CRA is really meant for anyone who builds a thing. The Cyber Resilience Act is to ensure that we have safer products and services within Europe. And then the NIS2 is really applicable to certain parties that are delivering infrastructure and services that's really important for the fabric of society. So if we kind of split it in that thing, and the AI Act and the CHIPS Act and all the acts that are still going to happen, by the way, regarding sovereignty. So that is something I am really worried about, because the reason I'm worried about it is the whole principle of the internet is, you have access to all the things, whatever is the best solution. It's almost like a democratic process. People start using things because they are good, not because of where they are from. And that is definitely going to be a change that we're going to be seeing in Europe. There's a very strong move to go for national clouds, for things that are just baked here, or to support only European-made products. And there is a question of, can you actually compete on quality, on effectivity of all of these things? And the legislative environment and the regulatory environment is not going to help foreign competition that might be much, much better actually compete effectively in Europe, faced with these domestic products. And that actually really concerns me, because if we're already worried about a race to the bottom in terms of security products not being able to keep up to par with their own status of vulnerabilities and their own security, I think that's almost a bigger concern for me to say that we're only going to use an AI model developed in Europe, and the largest companies will only use those AI models. These kinds of concerns are, I think, genuinely worrying, because we shouldn't be restricted from those things. But I am afraid that it's going to have this similar impact to tariffs, in fact, for Europe, this type of regulatory setup.
This feels a lot like, whose jets do you buy, right? Whose tanks do you buy? And it is a similar type of question. But I also think that too many countries, even that are allied, still reserve a capability from a cyber dimension. And it's still, yeah, okay, we'll align the more visible tools of extension of power by other means. We'll align those, but these ones we sort of have our own doctrines for. And when I look at like take NATO, right? I don't think we've done enough to align capabilities there. Yes, there's NATO cyber games and such, but what we've learned in the conflict in Russia, Ukraine right now is that cyber is a part of every domain of warfare. We were always expecting a massive cyber attack in its own right, and we had the debate a while ago whether cyber warfare even existed or not a decade ago. I don't think that's a debate. I think it's a question of when now. I think Josh is going to say the same thing, but I saw the skeptical roll of the eyes there. So, but at some point, I think we have to start having more serious discussions about cyber rules of engagement among allies, and what do we do to bolster each other's capability. And I'm not privy to some of those conversations anymore, but I think those need to be advanced, and I think they need to be more visible if they're happening. And I don't think we've had that discussion. And your point about which AI do we use, it's exactly the same question of whose next generation fighter do we buy. It is a political decision, and it's also a tactical and a strategic decision. And I think those need to be advanced as well. Josh, I know you've got opinions.
Well, I'm still trying to hold on to Jen's original prompt or question here.
17 questions that I threw at you, yeah.
Yeah. So I thought we were going to go in a slightly different direction, but so I'll pivot a little. When the US would not make a national privacy law, right? So we had a bunch of pocket federated state level ones, sometimes conflicting. And then GDPR comes around, and companies that want to sell to UK citizens have to do those things. Similarly, we have CRA and a bunch of things happening in Europe that are raising the bar for software accountability and secure product lifecycle, and maybe even like pockets of liability. And multinational companies that want to sell into Europe and to the UK have to meet their respective laws and barriers. And I think one of the things we've forgotten is that we're so afraid of stifling innovation, or the process we have with lobbying and public comment period, that we didn't realize we're still going to have all the burden of these things, but we've lost the driver's seat. As the people that invented the internet and helped fuel a lot of tech innovation, we have ceded some of our leadership opportunity, and now we're playing catch up on other nations' advances and laws. I think there's a panel coming up on that will hopefully touch on CVE, and cyber critical infrastructure is foundational to all sorts of other parts of cybering. And I think this administration for CyberNext could look at how do we maintain or reclaim some leadership role here in some of the very technologies that the world got from us. And I'm not trying to make a patriotic or territorial exceptionalism argument. I'm saying that in our desire to slow things down, pump the brakes, do minimums, do voluntary, other countries are moving forward. They realize sooner or differently that we are over dependent on dependable things, and we need to shift some of the accountability and put the cost burden on those in the best position to this. This is actually what we're doing is highly diseconomic. And I'd like us to not be so focused on internal that we lose the fact that other nations are moving forward on potentially conflicting frameworks, and we could and should reclaim some of that leadership over.
Hey, can I just add, I don't think that boat, specifically on CV, that is sailed. The EUVD is a thing. And I think in terms of a long-term future, they're never going to rely on a solely US model ever again. I think the threat, and it is in more areas, right? It's almost like, I remember that when almost a decade ago, when I used to walk around the European Commission, that I would hear things like, yeah, we shouldn't be so reliant on American GPS. So they built their own GPS. So there are so many things that there used to be this, let's look at what the United States is doing. And I think that is, for now, very much in most things, not the approach.
Awesome. Thank you for that. I would love to get into the CVE discussion. It is one very near and dear to my heart specifically, as I sit on the CVE board. But this next session is on CVE, so you've primed that perfectly. And you guys should keep watching for that session. Right, so we only have a few minutes left. And so what I would like to ask is, if you are speaking directly right now to policymakers, whether they're in the US or further afield, what is your number one thing that you want them to go away and do? Or come talk to you to do, might be a better way of putting it. What is your number one piece of advice to them? Or your number one ask? I see Josh has come off mute.
Well, somebody has to go, right? So for me, while most of the attack density has been economic, I do think we all know, policymakers know, there's pretty bipartisan bicameral support, executive branch and legislative branch, that typhoons are a big deal. We know what they're going to do. We know approximately when they're going to do it. We know approximately how they're going to do it. And we have not been kind to our defenders, and if we're going to shift the burden from the federal government to the states, as we did through an executive order in March, we have not been kind to our defenders. So I would say these are pretty massively multi-sector. They cross silos. They're multi-stakeholder. I think we should have some humility that the federal government is not really good at cross-sector, multi-sector. And I would like our policymakers to consider something like a task force or something like a named operation that can be focused on the resilient continuity of operations for lifeline functions upon which the U.S. population and economy depends upon. And that requires ruthless prioritization left of boom, not waiting for things to be in the rubble right of boom. So I would love to see some leadership on cross-sector, ruthless prioritization in anticipation of typhoon disruptions. And if we can take those punches, then we're much better off throwing punches. Over.
I'm gonna, because you asked for this for policymakers. I wasn't sure. I had so many requests for so many different constituents and sizes, organizations, and so on. So, having just gone through the sales loft drift incident, the number of different regulations and specificity is insane. And I think everybody feels that to a certain degree in different countries and verticals. But here's the pattern. It's getting harder and harder to do some of these things. Disclosure in some jurisdictions now is measured in single-digit hours you can measure on one hand. Sometimes it's difficult to know even what has happened in a 24-hour period. And even with the best of intentions, I'm sorry, a 3-hour disclosure, 3 hours? So my advice is to back up and make sure as policymakers, you know the outcome you want and you know for whom. You know, why do you want this? Who do you want it for? What behaviors do you want? And how long do you think is that necessary for? Josh, last year you were talking about HIPAA and you made a great example. And I've talked to others about this. When is it no longer needed? When is it detrimental? You know, if you look in our technically in our sim space, for instance, we still buy stuff with ridiculous rules and requirements because of regulations that are 15 plus years old. So I would just ask that anybody who's putting these regs out put as much thought into their maintenance and their utility and what they're for and for whom, because it has huge impacts downstream on the practitioners as a tax on us. And it's a big deal. And it's only going to get worse. And I don't want that. And I know no one else does. At some point, it's going to go negative in disclosure, and that's terrible. So yeah, it'll be a precog thing. So anyway, over to you.
I have to think about this one for a bit, because I think so often, you know, we've had the luxury of asking for some incremental improvements. Wouldn't it be great if we had a regulation that helped us do this and, you know, had this sort of carrot and stick effect, and so that way we could like move the herd towards a particular direction that they wouldn't get attacked by the lions. And now I feel like we have a very real danger of sort of internal collapse because we are not able to work together. A lot of the things that I previously took for granted are the things that I'm the most worried about. Like you know, Megan this morning referred to this is a 2015. I am genuinely concerned about the lack of ability to share intelligence about bad actors. I can't even believe we're discussing it. You know, I worry about all of the efforts we have across the pond to just share information with each other. I think if I had one ask of policymakers, it's to try to find your way across those bridges and help and assist those defenders in actually doing their job by connecting to other defenders.
That is a great note to finish on. Thank you, Jaya. Which just leaves me to thank all of our luminaries and to thank you, our listeners, for joining this session of Cybersecurity Buzzword Bingo. I hope that you enjoyed it and that you all got bingo. And I look forward to hearing what the luminaries have to share next year. Enjoy the rest of CyberNext. Thank you.